What are we starting with this week, boys?
Not a Wii review.
No,
YouTube
not
comment.
A review. No, not a YouTube comment.
Not Spotify.
No.
We did that last week.
Patreon.
Yeah! Because this week, as our viewers and listeners know, is our Patreon vote episode. And
it is as well.
It is. Yeah, and I just want to say a little thanks to our patrons, our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/SCI Guys. They keep the lights on here.
They do.
Except for when we turn them off.
I wish I had a button to turn them all off.
The lights.
Just under the desk, just be like,
not the patrons. Not the patrons, the lights. The lights.
Yes.
Let's start the show.
Yes, please.
Let's start the show.
Hello and welcome to the SCI Guys, the show where we talk about the crazy, weird, and wonderful stories from the science world. I'm Corey, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jamp and Luke Cutforth.
Hello.
Hello there.
This week, we're talking about witchcraft and wizardry.
Didn't we recently talk about witchcraft? It's not about Hogwarts, is it?
No, it's not about Hogwarts.
Okay,
It's not about
good.
the Science of Hogwarts.
The Science of Hogwarts.
It doesn't exist.
Let's talk about how all the magic works, theoretically.
Oh, that would be a good one. That's a good one for a future one. Yeah, no, so this week we're doing a Patreon vote episode. Obviously, our patrons voted for a topic. This month's topic is the science of witchcraft.
Okay. Dubious.
Had no choice in this. As a patron.
Sound a little bit enthused. Come on.
I know, I'm very excited, but I'm just saying this is not one that I chose. So it was a toughie. But as a patron, you have the opportunity, nay, the right to submit a topic for the vote every single month, whichever topic you want. And then we put the vote out to the rest of our patrons, and whichever one wins is the one that we do, because we are democratic. So we're doing the science of witchcraft.
That it works that way. Yeah.
I think I found a pretty good sort of topic for this episode. So shall we get started?
Tell me all about it.
Yeah. Okay. So
are we going to learn to cast spells?
Kind of.
Ooh.
A little bit, actually.
Oh, okay.
This might help you in your life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Wicca first, because this is kind of the focus of what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about Wicca a little bit before, probably on our live shows, SCI Guys Live, every second Sunday on our YouTube channel. And the thing about Wicca is that I find it really interesting, because the sort of spells that some Wiccans do, some sort of witchy people do, they're kind of not necessarily unscientific. There's kind of a little bit of a scientific backing to them, and I'm going to get into that. But first, what is witchcraft and what is Wicca?
There is a religion behind it, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of them is a religion.
What? One of them is that Wicca?
Wicca.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Wicca is kind of like a polytheistic religion. But then you don't need to be Wiccan to be a witch. And you don't really need to be a witch to be Wiccan. There's kind of and as well there's kind of there's I wouldn't say sort of murky territory, but often the two get conflated.
Yes.
And people expect Wiccans to be doing things that they don't actually do, like worshipping the devil or things like that. But actually, Wicca is it's kind of based on pre-Christian religion, sort of pagan religions. And religion is a very sort of harsh word. Harsh word? It's a very strong word. It is registered.
Carries a lot of weight.
Yes, it is recognized as a religion, Wicca, but you could sort of see it as being more spiritual. It's not necessarily as hard and fast as, say, I guess, Christianity. You don't need to practice or really follow through on all parts of Wicca to sort of be a Wiccan. And I suppose the same actually exists for Christianity. You could just be a sort of spiritual Christian. Anyway, there are many Wiccans in the US. There's hundreds of thousands to 1.5 million or even 3 million.
Wow.
I've seen estimates of, and it can be difficult to get the exact number on that. And as I said, it's heavily based on pagan and pre-Christian religions. And you can trace sort of apparently Wiccan sort of traditions and rituals back to a person named Margaret Murray, who was a first wave feminist, and she wrote a lot of books on sort of medieval religion, and this started in 1921. So you can trace a lot of Wiccan sort of I guess rituals back to then. But obviously, you can trace some of them back even farther. Although Wicca is more of a sort of modern interpretation of pagan beliefs, I guess.
Right.
And actually, a lot of places where you look, you'll see Wicca being attributed to someone called Gerald Brousseau Gardner, who was born in 1884 and died in 1964. So Wicca is really, technically, it's only about
It's quite relatively. It's quite a modern religion, isn't it?
yeah, relatively speaking, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even 100 years old technically yet.
Wow.
In its sort of modern interpretation. However, obviously, it goes back a lot farther than that. And if you want to think of it in the sort of pantheon of religions, you could think of it as being similar to sort of Hinduism or Buddhism, in that there are many. It's not sort of one god above all. There's sort of a number of gods, mainly the sort of goddess, which is kind of seen as sort of Mother Nature, and the horned god, which is sort of male god with horns. I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it called the horn god?
Yeah, the horned god.
It's called the horned god.
Well, it's referred to as the horned god
Right.
or the horned deity.
But that's not Satan.
No,
Not Baphomet.
Right.
Is that Baphomet?
I'm not sure if it's Baphomet. No,
Okay.
I'm gonna be
Would-
honest. Go on, Luke.
Would you be able to give me a short summary of the differences between Wicca and witchcraft and sort of introduce me to what these are? Because I don't really know anything about this. I know some people who are Wiccan, I think. And I feel like I'd know one if I saw one, but that also sounds like maybe I'm ascribing a stereotype there.
Sounds like you're trying to do a witch hunt here, my friend.
Hey, I'm not hunting. I just know when I see one.
I know one when I see one. We've got a test.
Takes one to
we
know
weigh them
one.
against a duck. No,
Please enlighten me as to even the very basics of what we're talking about.
I'll be honest. I thought I quite heavily related Wicca and witchcraft together. Like I thought they were pretty much the same thing.
yeah. So I mean, I guess witchcraft is kind of just magic. It's just the sort of magic, like doing magic. That's witchcraft.
Yeah.
Being a witch is sort of being someone that I guess does magic.
Yeah.
Now you can be Wiccan and be a witch. Some Wiccans will refer to themselves as witches. And I guess I think it's neo-pagans would generally don't want to be referred to as witches. And
Right.
neo-pagans are kind of similar to Wiccans apparently, but there are differences. Again, this week I dove entirely into a new topic, which was
Time to test.
yeah. So the difference between sort of Wicca and witchcraft is, I guess, the easiest way to look at it is witchcraft is sort of just magic.
Yes.
That sort of area. Whereas Wicca has the sort of spiritual backing, the more religious backing with the kind of pagan beliefs in there. They have like Wicca has holidays. You celebrate holidays as a Wiccan that are recognized by the United States at least. There are sort of rituals involved in I guess. Okay, put it this way. If I was to make it as simple as possible, Wicca is to witchcraft as, I guess, Christianity is to prayer.
Right.
You
Okay.
see? So prayers do form a part of Christianity. You can pray as a Christian, and that kind of rolls into the religion. However, prayer can exist in and of itself without any of the religious trappings of Christianity.
Okay.
So in that metaphor, Wicca is the religion and witchcraft is the prayer.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
witchcraft is kind of a practice, is the sort of practice of magic. And a practice of magic is something that is, I don't want to say integral to Wicca, because I don't think I know enough about Wicca to say that. But I think it's a fairly prominent part of Wicca.
yeah.
The sort of rituals and magic.
Well, yeah. No, there are Christians that don't pray.
Yeah,
Some
absolutely.
Christians. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the thing.
Are there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
There are Christians that don't pray.
Yeah.
surely. Yeah.
I don't know how many there are, but yeah, there are.
Well, there will be people that say they've got sort of Christian beliefs that don't necessarily pray.
Yeah.
I mean, again, now I don't want to. This is something that I often think is an issue when talking about religions that are sort of new or like sort of spiritual beliefs that are new to people or unfamiliar. We tend to sort of think of the unfamiliar ones as being specifically like sort of one thing. So if you look at Christianity, it's very wide ranging. You've got people from Jehovah's Witnesses to Mormons.
Yeah.
They fall under Christianity. Catholics, Protestants, Episcopalians.
So many.
So many different sort of sects of Christianity. And then you've got people that are very, very strict with it. You've got the people that are living in the Vatican with the Pope.
Oh my goodness.
I say people, predominantly men, because we love a little bit of sexism, don't we, lads?
And men aren't people.
So you've got the ones living in the Vatican, and then you've got people that are just kind of like, yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say I'm Christian. I guess I believe in God. I don't go to church. I don't do anything, but when it comes down to it, I'm kind of Christian. And we don't apply that sort of broad range of belief to unfamiliar religions. If we think about sort of, I guess, even something like Hinduism, generally, I think most sort of white people in the UK will think of Hinduism and think, oh yeah, people that practice Hinduism practice it religiously.
Sure, no, but you can be culturally Hindu.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm saying here is that when I talk about Wicca, remember that it is incredibly broad ranging. You can't sort of box people in. There are people that are Wiccans that believe less as a sort of literal god and goddess, and more see it as sort of energy and nature and that sort of human interpretation of that. And there are Wiccans who are scientists. I found an interview with one, which you can find in the description. So yeah, just as a sort of I guess dive into Wicca as religion, it is fairly new. It caught on like massively in the 1960s because this sort of spirituality and those sort of trends were really big in the US at that point, and those kind of highlight some of the areas of Wicca, the sort of spirituality that was big in the 60s in the US. It's also been picked up by a lot of feminists because there is sort of a very feminist through line to Wicca as a sort of belief and set of practices. And yeah, so what I'm saying is that it's new and it's a broad-ranging religion, and it involves the use of magic. And yeah, that's kind of an introduction to Wicca. What are your questions on it? I think this is the easiest way. What are your questions on Wicca? And let's see if I can answer them.
So I'll give an example. If you can sum up, or I would sum up if I was asked, the sort of imagery of the Christian faith is that there is a God who created the world in a way that a potter makes a pot, right? Out of clay, made something out of something else, or brought it into being. Like it was made rather than grown, for example. So there's a creator of the world, and that creator of the world has some level of interest in the doings and happenings of that world, and is not just completely indifferent to it, and will get involved and change things occasionally, and then that creator then saw that humanity was sort of going astray, and sent usually his son to Earth in order to sort of set the record straight and go, your religion's basically full of stuff that's kind of not really the point, and this is the point, really. So now you can go away and you can sort of now realize what the point of it was originally, rather than all this stuff you've added to it. That's, I think, a fairly succinct description of Christianity.
Yeah.
What is the imagery of Wicca?
Okay. Sorry, I was just thinking about God getting cancelled in the Old Testament and then having to send down Jesus to do some damage control.
No, it was more like God cancelled himself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. God was like, look, I am not going to abide by that previous behavior. And, I'm a loving God now. Anyway. No, so I guess Wicca. I guess there's not really such a sort of a strict canon to Wicca. There's not a strict story as there is in the Bible. Wicca is more sort of a general set of beliefs, which is why it's difficult to sort of pin down like Christianity. Generally, like I've said, Wiccans believe in the goddess and the horned god, and they believe they believe in many gods. Generally, the two that they will believe in is the goddess and the other one, the horned god. They believe in sort of respecting nature, and there is, I guess, there is sort of the Wiccan golden rule. I think this would be the easiest way to sort of give you an idea of what it is.
Okay.
It's called the Wiccan Reed.
Ooh.
It basically says, if it harm none, do what you will. And this has been sort of rephrased
I like that.
many different ways. So like, harm no one. Don't cause harm.
Oh, I don't
that's
think that's what it means. I think it means do what you want as long as it doesn't cause harm. It doesn't sound like it means don't harm. Like, I mean, it does. It also includes don't harm, but this is.
No, absolutely, yeah. So do what you want as long as it doesn't harm others. But I guess when it comes to sort of magic, and those practices, generally the rule to abide by is don't cause harm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't really find like one Wiccan text, like that's the Bible or the Quran.
Well, you say that there is the Book of Shadows, and it's very interesting. This. I wish I could have spent more time looking into this. Honestly, I really wish I could. But
get yourself a copy of the Book of Shadows on Amazon.
Do you know what? Maybe we should do another episode, which is fully based on Wicca, and we bring a Wiccan in to chat to us about it.
That'd be sick.
Be great,
I'd
wouldn't
love that. I would absolutely love that.
I mean, I've read about the Book of Shadows. Apparently, there are things saying that the Book of Shadows would need to be like each Wiccan needs to make their own copy of the Book of Shadows. I guess it's like sort of a book of spells, essentially. So it's not quite like a holy
Standard
text.
Book of Spells, Chapter 1. Hell yes.
Look,
Yeah.
you're insulting people's deeply held beliefs here.
Bring Harry Potter.
Sorry, I
references
didn't mean
in.
that in an insulting way. I didn't mean that like.
No,
you're- I mean that's the only spell book I have in my memory. I'm sure it is much more serious than the standard book of spells used in Transfiguration in Harry Potter.
Look, I'm joking.
Sorry, that is actually very insulting.
I just made a joke about God canceling himself. I think you're fine. Okay, like you're good.
Okay, yeah.
Well,
but of course, but you can insult the Christians because they have to ask God to do stuff, but the Wiccans, they can cast spells on you.
Oh God, they can do
So
it
you have to be
themselves.
careful.
Well, there's also
because they can't because they break the rule. Okay,
well, there's also
good.
there's also the rule of, I think it's the rule of three or the rule of threefold. I can't exactly quite remember the name of it, which is basically sort of anything you put out will come back to you.
Karma.
Threefold.
That's like karma.
It is, yeah, it is.
Threefold. Whoa.
Yeah.
Threefold.
Wow.
Yeah. So
So do no harm.
well, yeah, and I mean I've read about some Wiccans performing hexes or curses, but
Yeah.
I think generally there's a very, at least from my point of view, there is a streak of positivity to it. So if you want to understand Wicca in, I guess, a sentence, it's a sort of polytheistic religion that is based on traditions from before Christianity that generally involves the respect of nature, and basically says do what you want so long as you don't harm anyone.
Now, what I find really interesting about this is like, so you have this idea where you're kind of like, so if you create a character like a noun, if you're not that the Wiccan god is not necessarily a character, whatever you believe is great. But what I mean is like, do you believe in like, is it a belief? It's like Christian belief actually literally believes in God is a like almost like a really gigantic person, rather than like, you know what I mean? God is a personal individual who looks over the world, literally, rather than that being a human way of understanding something that is not understandable. So, for example, if you had the god of nature, like you might not necessarily literally believe that the god of nature has subjective consciousness, but the god of nature being described as a person, like in the way that we understand people through our human minds, you can describe what the god of nature does, and you don't necessarily literally believe the god of nature has subjective consciousness. It's more of a description of what happens and how the world comes to be and how things come to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get. But the thing is, I would rebut that sort of belief could also exist among Christians. I mean, I've definitely seen Christians that believe that God is sort of not literally a big man in the sky.
I fully agree with you. I don't think that most Christians necessarily believe it. But what in my experience of growing up Christian, I was taught that God was the way I've described, and I was never taught that was sort of a way of downloading spiritual information into my mind, into my human mind. I was sort of taught it as if it were literally true. So when God sent a plague of locusts, an individual God actually made the decision to send a plague of locusts rather than God is the ultimate truth of the world, and a plague of locusts came down, and therefore God did send the plague of locusts. So God is like a noun we use to describe the ultimate truth, whatever the ultimate truth is. Rather, like the way I was described it was like God personally actually has first person consciousness and decided bunch of locusts over there right now.
Go on.
Well, this the thing about the thing about Wicca is, at least what I've read, is that, and again, this may sound very silly to any Wiccans listening, but look, from what I've read, you could be Wiccan and have the very literal belief that the goddess and the horned god are literal sort of beings, and that can even range towards being less of a sort of literal belief and more, as you said, sort of an understanding of the world. Or a sort of human understanding of how the world actually works. I think the point that I'm making here is that, at least from my perspective, Wicca seems to be more flexible on the sort of
way you interpret
God
it.
aspect. Yeah,
Right. Brilliant.
I feel like, at least from what I've seen, Wicca seems to be more based around the sort of beliefs and practices rather than the literal let's praise these gods in particular.
Yeah.
However, I mean, I've seen many Wiccans, obviously, like that do believe in many, and there are more than those two gods, by the way. As I said, it's polytheistic, it's pantheistic, it's got many gods. But I don't think you don't necessarily need to literally believe that there are actual literal gods and goddesses to be Wiccan. I mean, from what I've read here, I mean, I've read here that there are Wiccans that are atheist, or kind of view gods and goddesses as sort of symbols rather than like sort of actual beings. I mean, look, we could spend all day talking about this. I think the takeaway really is that Wicca is a religion. It's actually a fully legitimate religion, and many Wiccans would refer to themselves as witches, and witchcraft is kind of the practice of magic. But we'll get into what that magic is in a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah. So, because this sounds, if you're tuning into a Sci Guys episode, I get it, and we're talking about a religion, and you're like, wait, where's the science coming in? It'll be here in a bit.
I don't care about the science. This is fascinating. I
I think I started the wrong podcast with you
Move
guys.
over science. I'm a Wicca.
Just for 1 week, we'll be the Wicca guys.
Yes.
I was about to make. Do you know what? This is the issue. I have references to films in my head that I know our audience would not understand. When you said the Wicker guys, I was like, oh, the Wicker Man. What if I do Nick Cage in the Wicker Man? None of them are gonna get it, and I'm gonna look like a crazy person.
Some people will get it.
Yeah, maybe like 3 or 4. The bees. They're sting. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about Wicca legitimacy, because a lot of people would not think that it's actually a legitimate religion. But in 1986, it was recognized as an official religion in the United States. So it was through a landmark case. And in that case, someone was refused the ritual objects that they needed to sort of, use for their sort of worship while they were in prison. Oh. And so that obviously went to court, and the person was like, the Wiccan won, and from that point on, it kind of set the precedent of, okay, Wicca is like a legally sort of recognized religion in the United States.
Cool.
In 1998, a Wiccan student sued. Basically went against the school board and won, because the school board tried to stop her from wearing Wiccan jewelry.
Oh.
And then as late as 2004, an army sergeant was the first Wiccan serving in the US military to die in combat. At least the first registered one. And his family was not allowed to put the sort of the Wiccan a Wiccan symbol on his gravestone, because it would have been a military gravestone.
Oh.
But they then took it to I think they took it to court. Yeah, they took it to court. And Wiccan symbols are now allowed on veterans' gravestones.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so Wicca is it is a fully recognized religion. It's not just. I feel like there is, and I feel like I need to say this because there is a sort of view as Wicca as being this sort of like fun thing that sort of quirky people pick
Yeah.
up, you know. But it's not really that. It is fully a thing.
Yeah.
And it is based on a long history of traditions, even older than Christianity itself, which is, you know, we kind of look at as the benchmark. But it's not even really that old.
No.
I mean, if you look at all religions, Christianity is pretty old. It's
Yeah.
definitely not the oldest.
No, there's older.
Yeah, Judaism for one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so that settled. Wicca is legitimate. It is fully religion. We didn't need to really cover that, but just for any of the sort of people listening that might have not been aware of that, I kind of want to dive into witchcraft and sort of Wiccan magic. Now, I'm going to be totally honest. If there are any Wiccans listening and I get any of this a little bit wrong, please let us know in the comments, because obviously this stuff is very difficult to research, I find. Because I don't know specifically what sources to trust fully on this. So
Yeah.
I found some, all linked in the description, that I think are pretty solid, that give a good sort of description of sort of Wiccan practices and magic. And yeah, let me know. Let me know if there's anything that we've missed. But these ones that I'm talking about seem to be sort of seem to be present in a lot of places. They pop up in a lot of places, and where
Yeah.
I've taken them from seem to be fairly reputable. So, have you guys, before I dive in, have you guys heard of anything that you might think might crop up here? Any sort of magic that you think we're going to chat about?
Is there anything to do with incense burning? Is there incense burning?
Yeah,
in
that
Wicca?
is gonna. Incense burning is gonna come up. Yeah,
Cool.
So yeah, no, so you guys are on the right track. You guys are on the
Okay.
right track.
Okay.
So let's start with the law of attraction.
Is
so
this Wicca?
well, it's not. So the law of, again, what I'm talking about here isn't like explicitly Wicca, right? So
Right.
sorry, not explicitly. It's not exclusively Wicca. So
Mhm.
these are things that Wiccans may or may not sort of use, but it doesn't mean it's exclusively Wicca.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Remember it. So this
But
is
it's part of Wicca. It's part of Wicca.
Okay, yes, this is witchcraft. Which
Right. Well, I
Wiccans-
mean, the law of
which
attraction
Wiccans-
is that witchcraft? I don't know if it is.
Well, it kind of falls on it. There's kind of that falls under that sort of broad spectrum of beliefs.
Okay.
Now, again, just to say this. So remember, if you think of witchcraft as being like prayer, and Wicca as being like Christianity,
Yeah.
many belief systems involve prayer, but that doesn't mean that sort of prayer is exclusive to Christianity.
Right.
So these practices, yeah, they can be practiced by Wiccans, but you don't need to be Wiccan to practice them. And it doesn't mean that they're exclusively Wiccan sort of beliefs or practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. So the law of attraction, that does come into sort of that sort of witchy sort of magic stuff. And essentially what it means is that like attracts like. Or it kind of also feeds into the sort of manifestation as well.
Right.
So I guess kind of your outlook will kind of a way to sort of view this is that your outlook will sort of interpret where your reality goes, if that makes sense.
If you focus on something and like direct your energy towards it,
Yeah.
you're more likely to achieve it.
Yeah, like if
And
you
quicker.
if
Yeah.
you focus on the positive, you're going to see
Yeah.
a positive outcome. If you focus on the negative, you're likely to see the negative outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is perfectly fair. So that is sort of one sort of magic sort of magic sort of belief, I guess, that falls into the sort of witchcraft, or I keep on wanting to say witchcraft or wizardry, witchcraft or Wicca. But like, let's get into maybe some like actual sort of magic that might be practiced by Wiccans, but definitely falls under witchcraft. So there's candle magic. So that's essentially just essentially burning candles. But what you do is you send magical intentions through flames, I guess, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Essentially you essentially burn a candle to perform magic in this sense.
That's kind of in Christianity a little bit, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Yeah, I
a
mean-
little bit of that in Christianity.
I mean, a lot of Christianity adopted a lot of pagan, adopted some
Yeah.
paganism.
Ah.
If you think about this, you've probably heard that Jesus wasn't born on the 25th of December. The reason
Sure.
that Christmas is that time of year is because it lined up with pagan rituals, and Jesus was likely born around about June, I think.
Right.
Yeah, but Christmas was kind of moved to, I think, be the winter solstice. So which
Yes.
was which is a pagan sort of holiday. Another pagan holiday, by the way, as well, I think, is Halloween. I think that
Oh yeah, of course.
I think that's pagan. At least sort of neo-pagans will celebrate that, or can celebrate that. Yeah, and essentially this is like a really straightforward sort of starting point, supposedly, for if you want us to get into witchcraft. Candle magic, it's a really easy thing to do. I think essentially it is burning a candle with sort of a visualization of what you want to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that burning the candle will essentially, through some kinds of magic, make those manifest those sort of intents. Yeah.
So it's similar to manifestation in that way, then.
Yeah, I think. Well, to be fair, I think a lot of this is taking if you were to view it through this sort of lens, a less sort of magical lens, it's taking the sort of like manifestation idea and applying sort of a more physical reality
like a
to it.
ritual. Okay, so
Yeah.
like an actual ritual that you're doing.
In
Yeah,
a
because
sense,
often I've heard about manifestation stuff, and often I've like everything I've seen has been fairly non-specific.
Yeah.
It's been sort of like just focus on what you want and believe that it's true, and then it becomes true. And that's sort of like prayer. Like in prayer, I think in Catholicism, there's the idea of like you have to pray and then trust that it already is true, and then it comes true. And that's like, okay, well, that's just manifestation.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's why I
Right.
brought up prayer as an example earlier, because I genuinely, from what I've looked into this, prayer and magic seem like very similar. Very
Yeah.
like I see, and this is coming from an atheist perspective and not just an atheist perspective of like, oh, I at some point I decided that I think for as long as I can remember, I've literally always been an atheist.
Yeah.
Like, it's ridiculous. Like, I remember them telling us about God as a kid, and I was like, well, I guess I'll pray just in case. But there was never this sort of like, I was never like fully sold. I was always like, well, you've told me about hell, and that sounds horrible, so I'll do this just in case it's true, you know?
I remember when I was a kid and I really wanted something, I'd pray to God and be like, okay, if I get this thing, I promise I'll start believing in you.
Yeah, exactly.
I prayed for magic powers. I used to love Sabrina the Teenage Witch. It was my favorite TV show. And I prayed for magic powers like Sabrina the Teenage Witch has, where I can go like that and I can point at something and magic happens. Like so much. I prayed so much for that and it never came true. And I was so sad.
Well, look, I think it did come true, because through the powers of video editing, you can
No.
and make things happen. I guess I guess the way I would say this is the sort of ritual strengthens the manifestation in a sense. And again, this is my understanding of it, not Wiccan. So if that is incorrect, please do correct me. But from what I've seen, that's what I've gathered. There's also herbal magic, which is essentially using like what it sounds like herbs and plants, and sort of infusing sort of incenses and oils with those herbs. And I guess the idea is that different herbs have got different sort of strengths or powers, I guess you could say, and using specific combinations can have specific results. And yeah, so that's sort of herbal magic, if you understand. It's almost like sort of I guess I was gonna say herbology in Harry Potter. It's
Can't keep making Harry Potter references. I feel so guilty for my Harry Potter reference. I was just overjoyed with the fact that it was literally called like the Book of Spells. It was like so unapologetically witchcraft, and I was just so excited by that. And the first thing my brain latched onto was Harry Potter, and I was like, oh wait, no.
yeah, no,
That's
this is
insulting.
look, to be honest, right? I'm gonna address this sort of elephant in the room. If I don't want to offend anyone by mentioning Harry Potter, but what I'm saying here is the reason that I brought up herbology is because the sort of closest thing that I think the three of us have in our lives to the understanding of magic is through the root of Harry Potter.
That's true.
And to sort of and to sort of really nail down what I mean by that. there is a lot of Harry Potter that is taken from actual sort of magical beliefs. You know, like many of the ingredients used in potions are actual sort of plants that the plants that exist in the real world that people have used for magical things. Mandrake roots,
wolfsbane.
yeah,
and stuff like that,
wolfsbane.
yeah.
All of these different things are real things that have been used in magical practices. And so for people who are sort of being introduced to this, the easiest way for me to remember all of these things is literally through Harry Potter. And that's not to say that
that they're the same.
That they're the same at all. No, it's almost as though if someone had watched Superman films and they'd done a lot of sort of reading on Superman and they'd never been introduced to Christianity before. And when they were introduced to Christianity, they realized, oh, Superman draws a lot of parallels to Jesus Christ, which Superman does draw. Yeah, Superman is cool. Superman is always made as a Christ figure. Okay, here's a fun game to play. Whenever you're watching a Superman movie, just wait till he does a Jesus thing.
Every time he like T-poses in the air.
Yeah, he T-poses, someone reaches up their hands to him.
Yeah.
He's framed as a god. Yeah, man, like Superman is Jesus, bro.
Cool.
Like all the time.
Every time like the light's shining from behind him and he's like silhouetted.
Yeah, Zack Snyder went nuts on that. Like he killed him and brought him back to life because he wanted to make him Jesus so bad.
Oh my god, he did as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
So more about these herbs.
Yeah, I will. So
true.
just to finish that thought, I want to say that when we relate it to Harry Potter, what we're not saying that yes, Wicca comes from Harry Potter. What we're saying is that a lot of Harry Potter is clearly inspired by practices that are performed by Wiccans.
Yeah,
I think
it's because it's more like because it's recontextualizing Harry Potter, and it's like, oh, that thing from that film that I've watched and like read about for years, that comes from that, which is a real thing.
Yeah,
like not exactly the same, but it comes from that.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Although we can apologize all we like, but you guaranteed every person who's Wicca or practices witchcraft is absolutely exhausted with this comparison.
They're probably sick of it.
Most definitely. So, yeah, we're sorry again, as is everybody who's ever made this comparison. But yes, tell me about these herbs, please.
I mean, that is it about the herbs. I mean, other than you can use the herbs to create different things. You can infuse them into oils or incenses. You can make them into sort of charms. And they all have different properties that they can bring to whatever you make with them. I won't get into the specifics here because I don't think it's necessarily important for what we're going to be talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to quickly tell me, is it potions that you drink to get better? Is it like you're making things to burn to ward off spirits? Like, what is the use case? Or is it like so many things? It's too broad.
It's really broad. So I don't think I've seen anything about specific potions. What I have seen is infused oils, which can be rubbed on certain things. So like I've seen someone use infused oils to bring luck with finding not love, but even love. I've seen people use oils to ease tension in relationships, to bring good luck. I've seen a lot of different things. It is very broad ranging, but essentially, I think the core concept here is that different sort of herbs and whatnot have different properties, and you can basically you can give those you can sort of utilize those properties by infusing different things with those herbs, whether it be sort of sachets that you make or infused oils or or anything like that.
This sounds similar to what we hear about a lot of, which is the idea that part of the reason why a lot of women got branded witches was because they were really knowledgeable about all the plants and their properties, and then usually men would accuse them of being witches, but actually they were like healers, and they just had a really good understanding of the properties of certain plants. But for some reason that was labeled witchcraft, which seems a large leap. It
is interesting in that, I mean, I'll get into it in a bit because there is a lot of interesting stuff up here about sort of plants and witchcraft and how that's kind of transitioned into our modern day. But just briefly, I've got two more things I want to talk to you about. Two quick sort of witchy things to chat about.
Okay.
One of which is magical oils. So basically, like essential oils. You guys know what essential oils are?
Yeah.
Smelly oils,
Yeah,
basically.
basically.
Yeah, smelly stuff.
Rub them on yourself, stuff like that. Breathe them
yeah.
in, diffuse them.
Yeah, I mean that's our general sort of idea of what an essential oil is. And so different sort of oils will have different properties. You can use them to make different incenses, and burning specific incenses will have specific outcomes, or like sort of, again, it's not necessarily do this and this will happen. It's more, this will have this kind of effect on your life. So if you burn this specific incense, you will likely meet a lover or something along those lines. Yeah?
Right.
That was just one that I pulled out of nowhere, but that's the kind of vibe that you're going for.
Sorry, is the idea beyond that that's not just because it smells nice like a perfume? That's actually like a magic thing going on there.
Yeah. It's not just that. It's not just it smells nice. It's more the oil has specific properties that will enhance whatever magic you're doing.
Right.
Yeah. So like you can use these oils in spells to kind of like to make them stronger, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also tarot cards. You guys have heard of tarot cards.
Yeah. I see
Yes.
this on TikTok all the time.
Yeah. Tell me what you guys know about tarot cards then.
I just know that you kind of you shuffle them up, and then the ones that you sort of retrieve from the deck in some way tell something about your future that is not necessarily set. I think generally you can change it, but it's sort of an indication of what path you're on right now if you didn't do anything to alter it.
Don't you pick? Is it? Well, from the versions I've seen, you kind of pick like 3 cards out of a tiny little deck, and each one indicates one indicates your past, one indicates your present, and the other's the future. And depending on which card it is and what position it's in, like forward, backwards, whatever, it can imply different things.
Yes, they can be upside down.
They can be upside down. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, like you guys are on the right track. What I do want to say really quickly is that it's not just shuffling up the deck. It's not just shuffling up the deck. That you've got to, the idea is that you've got to sort of infuse energy into it. And this is something that comes up a lot, is that there is sort of energy in all things. That's kind of a sort of through line belief in a lot of this sort of magic, is that different things have different properties through energy, and you can sort of infuse something with a certain kind of energy, if that makes sense. And so by infusing tarot cards are essentially a tool of divination, of seeing the future or inferring the future. And so by inferring them, by sort of giving the card to your energy, the belief is that you can sort of understand what is coming for you, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think you can also use tarot cards in spells. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of it again because it's not terribly important to what we're talking about today. But you can use tarot cards to build your spells. You can use them to enhance your spells. And I guess that's kind of what they can be used for. Yeah. So that is kind of all I've got to tell you about sort of Wicca and witchcraft and that sort of area of magic. I guess the sort of through line of all of it is that there is very much the belief of sort of manifestation, that what you need to sort of, you need to be focused on what you want, and it will sort of happen through these spells, if that makes sense. But also, whatever you give out will come back to you. So if you were to try and curse someone or hex someone, it is likely that is going to come back to you much worse. So it's almost an incentive to follow the sort of do no harm.
Yeah.
What I find interesting about that as a statement as well is that suggests that you have within you do have the power to do those things. But there's a sort of a suggestion that you shouldn't do it, which is really, to me, very interesting, because it's like, I don't expect that you would be able to pray to the Christian God to do something evil, and the Christian God would do it as long as he could also do it to you. But
well, you
it's
could pray.
interesting.
You could be tempted by the devil,
Right? You could pray to the devil. Right.
The devil could potentially have the outcome that you want, but also the devil will.
You've sold your soul.
Yeah, made a
Yeah.
deal with the devil. Yeah, and this is what's interesting. I think that when you really look into a lot of different religions, this is one reason that I guess I'm not religious, but I would say sometimes I really wish I could be. Because I don't think I physically have it in me. I don't think I could believe in any of this stuff. Like, I feel like on some level I'd be kind of being like, okay, come on, just pretend. And I genuinely don't think I can. Something would have to change in me or in my life to make me feel like actually able to do it. But the sort of similarity I see in all of these religions is that they are kind of just different lenses of viewing the world. And you can see similarities between sort of prayers and magic in sort of manifesting through intent or belief, you know? And I find that really interesting that regardless of sort of where you look through different religions, there is sort of the through line of don't harm other people, and you can change, you can sort of change your life, or you can affect the world through positive intent. I just find that really interesting.
When you say you don't think you could ever be religious, do you think you could be spiritual?
Nah. Well,
really interesting.
I mean, I don't know. Look, I'll get into why this is a science podcast in a sec.
I was just going to say, what would it mean to be spiritual and not religious?
Well, I think spirituality is finding your own truth, and religion is ascribing to a truth that is given to you to a certain extent. And that doesn't mean that the two are incompatible. You can be religious and also find your own truth within the religion. I think that religions can be like, science can come along and can debunk specific parts of your religion.
Yeah.
And if you're not spiritual underneath your religiousness, you know, like you could have every single part of the Bible scientifically be debunked and yet still believe that there is a truth beyond your 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever human limited senses. So spirituality is almost like humbleness to me, which is the idea that like, okay, I literally have no idea. I don't know what the world's made of. I don't know how I came to be. I don't know anything. And so it's like it's being humble. Whereas religion is like the idea that you do know the truth. In my definition of it, it's like this is actually the truth. And if you don't believe this truth, then you have in some way sinned. Or at least that's the truth I was given through my religion.
I mean, like the difference between sort of religion and spirituality in my mind, there's a lot of overlapping there with Luke. I think religion is more dogmatic. Religion has organized structure generally. And yeah, like Luke said, there's sort of rules and whatnot that come along with religion. Religions are, I think, are pretty much by definition, I may be wrong this. Well, I think could you have a non-theistic religion? Would that then really be a religion?
Maybe.
And so essentially, I guess religions need to be kind of organized around some central sort of. Oh, but theistic means to do with God, by the way. A God. Religions generally need to be organized around some kind of God, at least in my mind.
Whereas spirituality religion is the belief and worship of a superhuman controlling power. So that does suggest a God, but the superhuman controlling power could be atoms, I guess. It could be
when you stretch I feel like if you stretch,
it could be entropy. You could make a religion around entropy if you wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I guess spirituality is more the sort of like concerned with the spirit, concerned with the sort of soul, and spirituality can exist entirely separately to religion. You know, in terms of like you can do witchcraft, and you could believe in manifestation without believing in the goddess and the horned god, without believing in any of the other things that come along with that. You could believe that the sort of some of the teachings of Christianity, like, you know, the golden rule. What is it? Is it treat others like you want to be treated? I don't know. I've not
do unto others that
as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah, that one.
I don't look, mate. I don't remember anything. I don't remember what Jesus said, bro. It was a long time ago.
I think at its most fundamental, Jam, spirituality is just the belief that you are not confined to your physical body. So if your physical body is destroyed, the continuum of experience does not cease.
Yeah.
Whereas religion is like, these are the rules to a certain extent, generally. I mean, that's, again, I was brought up in a religion, and so my definition of religion is very related to the religion I was brought up into. I'm sure there are much less dogmatic religions.
Yeah.
And to be fair, when I say I'm not spiritual, that's not to say that, I think you don't need when someone says they're not spiritual, that doesn't necessarily mean they believe they know everything.
Yeah.
In my case, I know I don't know anything, but I don't
Yeah.
want to. I would not want to use my energy acting on things that I'm not certain of.
Mhm.
If that makes sense, I'd like to
Yeah.
have a degree of certainty before doing anything.
Yeah.
What I meant by that was I have a belief, for example, that there are things that cannot be known.
Absolutely.
And so whereas that would be a bit of a blow to science, if it, I mean, I'm sure it does stay open to the idea that it cannot be known, that it cannot be, but we base our entire society around science at the moment, and so, or like it has the impact on our world that the church used to have, and so if science were not actually able to eventually discover the ultimate truth, then that would sort of make its pedestal a little bit more crumbly.
I disagree. I think we've had conversations like this before, and I think the belief that science is searching for an absolute truth. I think when scientists and people that sort of are interested in science have that view of it, have that view that science is searching for an ultimate truth and that the ultimate truth is possible to find. I think, to me at least, that's a misunderstanding of what science is. I think the reason that science has its place in society right now is because it is currently really one of the most reliable methods for understanding the world. If you sort of think of religion and different kind of spirituality and science always being similar in that they're different lenses through which to view the world.
Yeah.
I would say that, at least in my opinion, science thus far is fairly reliable.
Yeah.
And where it, and in its ability to change. And I don't think that there needs to be an end point in sight for science to be for science to continue being the sort of power that it is. In fact, I think believing that there is an end point, there is a point where we will have all of the knowledge and will no longer need to search. I think that
Pack your bags, scientists.
yeah,
You're out.
I don't know. I just feel like that. I don't think that really messes with science because to be a good scientist, you always need to be asking more questions, and the belief that there will be some point where all the questions have been answered, that just seems to me as to be unrealistic and
Yeah.
not within the sort of realm of the way that science works.
We'll always have questions.
Exactly.
There's a really good quote that I think sums up what you're saying. I agree that I have a belief that is what science is, and it might actually be what science is. But there's a quote that reminded me of, which I have seen separately attributed to Galileo and Brecht, so I'm not sure who said it.
It will be, sorry, I do know, I will know the answer to this probably. This will likely be attributed to Galileo because Bertolt Brecht did a play called Galileo about Galileo. So it will likely be the character Galileo in the play written by Brecht. Go on.
Interesting.
Do you know the quote?
You'll say it and I'll be able to remember it, but I don't know off the top of my head.
It is, the aim of science is not to open the door to infinite wisdom, but to set a limit on infinite error.
Very good.
Interesting.
That sounds like kind of what you're saying.
Bloody love Brecht, man. I love a little bit of
good.
Brecht. Unless it was actually Galileo and I made a mistake, but the thing is, the Brecht Galileo thing seems like the likely outcome. But that is a wonderful quote. Shall we get into why what I'm going to talk about in terms of science today?
Yes, please.
Yes,
Tell us the
please.
science of Wicca.
So just to go briefly back over what we said about Wicca, at least from what I gathered, the sort of main basis for magic in Wicca is the understanding, or sort of that kind of area of witchcraft is the understanding that what you give out is kind of what will come back to you, and the idea that intent and sort of positive thought can manifest positive reality.
Right.
Yeah, and from generally from a scientific standpoint, that seems and bear in mind that throughout this episode I've kind of been discussing this through like as though it is true, if that makes sense. And I'm not here to say that it is or is not true. That's really not my place at all. But what I am going to do is explain how you can mesh these sort of beliefs of witchcraft with what I found in science, because it is really interesting to me. So let's start off with the easiest one. in terms of plants, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking a little bit about plants. Now, plants, the idea that plants can have certain sort of outcomes, plants can do certain things to humans, is not unscientific. In fact, many medicines have been derived from plants. Apparently, 80% of 122 plant-derived drugs that were studied in 2001 are related to their original sort of uses. So when people were using those, like historically, when people were using those plants as a sort of like herbal medicine, nowadays, like 80% of these plants that they studied are used for similar things. So, for example, if a certain plant was used for headaches, historically, there was a good chance that the sort of drug derived from said plant is used for a similar purpose, and that makes this seem, at least to some people, this may seem like, oh well, obviously, yeah. A lot of people will like kind of like write off herbal medicine, saying, oh, like it's not like real medicine, but actually, a lot of herbal medicine is, I mean, some herbal medicine is, it makes sense in that we're actually using those things anyway, you know, and a lot of medicines are derived from plants. So you've got things like even like opium, cocaine. Those are
taken from plants.
Yeah, derived from plants. I think aspirin initially derived from plants as well. You've got one that we had to learn in high school. I think it was digitalis is derived from a plant called foxglove. So many drugs are either sort of made from plants or initially derived from plants, or their active components can be found in plants. So the idea that plants can have an effect on the body and the mind is obviously not is obviously sort of supported in some ways by science. So I just wanted to touch on that one quickly because it's a really easy one. The idea that plants can have actual effects on the body. Now there like the idea of sort of concentration and whether, you know, the certain practices actually utilize those plants effectively. That's not what we're going to talk about right now. But like the idea that plants can have an effect on you, yeah, perfectly true. You know, perfectly meshes with a sort of scientific viewpoint. In fact, like when you look at a lot of old sort of potion ingredients, like mandrake roots, and wolfsbane and whatnot, some of those have then become like sort of have been, if you trace them, they're kind of been turned into drugs, if that makes sense. And that like the active components in them are now the active components used in certain drugs.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, it like there is like it's what Luke was saying earlier about the witches, that actually they were just women that knew a lot about sort of herbs and herbal medicines, and were then labeled as witches. And the herbs and herbal medicines that they used, they're used in science today it's under a different sort of it's viewed completely differently, but actually they're fairly similar, and it's just a much less sort of refined version of what we do in science today. That's not to say that you should use herbal medicine instead of, you know, like actual medicine. Actual medicine has been like refined, and we know specifically what it does.
I was going to say, so witches were kind of like pharmacists then, weren't they?
Yeah, to an extent. It's kind of like using lavender to relax.
Yeah, lavender's really good for sleep, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, it's relaxing, you know. Ginger, honey, and lemon for a sore throat. It makes you feel like all of that stuff, you know. So writing it off as just ridiculous is short-sighted, I think. But that's an easy one. Okay. What I want to talk about more is sort of actual spells. And have you guys heard of optimism bias or attentional bias?
No.
No?
I mean, if it's
Is it just
similar?
Is it the idea that if you're positive, good things will happen to you, or you'll only notice good things happening to you?
Yeah. Well, you've kind of hit the nail right on the head.
Yeah.
So we've spoken about this before on the podcast, I think. But yeah, and I think that's probably why this episode was suggested. So I had a look into optimism bias. So obviously, optimists are people that sort of see the good in the world. Essentially, the sort of scientific definition is optimists are people that expect for good things to happen to them. Really, a sort of simplified scientific definition of it. That's what we mean when we talk about optimists in science. And pessimists are obviously the reverse. They're people that would expect to see bad things happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're broad concepts, but essentially, if you really nail them down, it's essentially confidence and doubt. So if you're confident that good things will happen, you're an optimist. If you doubt that good things will happen, you're a pessimist.
Right.
Yeah. And there have been plenty of studies on this, and at least from what I've seen, it seems that optimists generally, there's a whole host of things that the optimists fare better in. Coping with distress, so coping with distress, optimists tend to cope with distress much better.
Mm-hmm.
In that, if a bad thing happens to an optimist, they're and there's been different mechanisms proposed for this, but one idea is that optimists will tend to get to the root of the problem rather than thinking, oh, this is completely out of my hands. It's all terrible. I can't do anything. There's also been studies on optimists versus pessimists in terms of post-surgery. Generally, optimists will have a better outlook on sort of life. And a better outlook on recovery, generally will feel better because isn't really important. But the idea is essentially that optimists have a more positive view of the world, and then you could say experience a more positive world because of that. And this is fully seen in science that optimism does have a generally pretty much overwhelmingly positive effect on your life. Now, the issue here is like defining specifically what an optimist is, because it's very difficult to say, oh, this person is an optimist and this person is a pessimist, because you can really say that in reference to each other, but no one is ever sort of fully optimistic or fully pessimistic, if you get what I mean. But generally, most people are seen to be, like, you could define most people as being kind of optimist or kind of in the middle, but generally leaning towards optimism. But so that's kind of the first thing I want to bring up, the fact that optimism is scientifically seen as a sort of positive thing for you.
I've just remembered, I've seen this exact thing described before in a book. I've seen it described as reverse paranoia. Whereas if you define paranoia as someone who assumes the world is out to get them, reverse paranoia is someone who assumes that the world is out to help them when they're at the lowest. And they tend to be happier people.
Yeah. So
that is great.
And so let's say you're casting a spell for, say, whatever thing to happen. If you know that your spells, if you've got the positivity, the sort of positive outlook that your spells will aid you in your life, then you're more likely, it would seem, to be an optimist, if that makes sense, or to be defined as an optimist, because you have this sort of positive outlook. You think that you expect good things to happen. If you perform a spell wanting good things to happen, then you're likely to expect good things to happen. And if it doesn't work, it's because you don't expect good things to happen. And that falls very much in line with the sort of the manifestation, the idea that like attracts like. You see?
I just realized that also, if you cast a spell intending for something bad to happen, and you also believe that it will return to you threefold, then you'll become a pessimist and your life will actually get worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you'll be like, 3 things that are bad are going to happen to me now.
Well, not necessarily 3 things, something 3 times worse.
3 times as bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No,
that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And this is why I wanted to bring this up, because I find it really interesting. And I feel like people kind of write this stuff off. So you can there are different ways of viewing it. My way of viewing it, my personal way of viewing this is that, as I've said before, religions, different kinds of spirituality, science, they're all similar to each other. We all kind of view them as we kind of view them in the same box, because they are all different ways of understanding the world around us.
Yeah.
The way that I choose to do it is generally science, because to me that makes the most sense. But when we look at similar things, we explain them in slightly different ways. So science would explain the sort of like attracts like, that rule of attraction, the law of attraction, and the idea of manifestation in the optimism bias.
Yeah.
And the fact that optimists tend to experience a better world because they expect better things. That's how science would explain it. But Wicca would explain that as the law of attraction and manifestation.
Interesting.
And so neither one is necessarily more correct than the other, because they're both describing the same thing. And sure, I think with some religions there comes the issue with religions often is that they explain things incorrectly, if that makes sense. They're not consistent with sort of the world around us. But in this instance, at least, Wicca seems to be consistent. At least if you want to view it in if you want to view it in a certain way, you could say that this explains why those sort of spells work to an extent.
So the way I've always wondered about the law of attraction is the idea that, so for example, if you think about the actual real limited ability you have to control your own body and to control your own mind, like you can't choose the emotions you feel, you can't choose, or maybe you can, but you can't control the emotions as they come up necessarily. They just come up. You don't choose to have the thoughts you have. They just appear. And what I wondered is if that suggests that like the actual part of us, like our conscious self, the individual that we believe ourselves to be, is only a part of the software that's running on our brain. If we can sort of pass a request through to the subconscious mind, then the subconscious mind can execute on that in ways that we don't necessarily understand. And so we will spot opportunities, not because they necessarily came about out of nowhere, but because our subconscious mind is looking for those opportunities. And if we weren't looking for those opportunities, they would just get filtered out and you wouldn't spot them.
Yeah,
because what you spot is not actually your choice. It happens subconsciously.
So this is actually interesting. You kind of brought us a little bit onto the attentional bias, which I'll really that's a great point and very astute, because you genuinely have almost hit the nail entirely on the head there. So the attentional bias is essentially it kind of describes like the fact that we usually will focus on certain things more than others. Obviously, your attention is limited; it's finite.
Yeah.
You cannot focus on everything at once, and so you kind of subconsciously decide what your attention needs to be focused on. Now, there is an issue there, because what decides what you focus on? You know, like how do you decide what to focus on? And because that's subconscious, you can't really control it, as Luke said. So the attentional bias is kind of the idea that certain things will affect what we are able to sort of like notice or pay attention to.
Yeah.
So an easy example, one that's often used, is hunger. If you're hungry, you're going to notice food more than other things, right?
Yeah.
Or like this is often in anxiety as well, and depression, in that if you're depressed, you start to notice things that make you more depressed. If you're anxious, you'll start to notice things that trigger anxiety more. Essentially, different stimuli will affect what you are more likely to pay attention to. And where I think this comes into Wicca is that, or sort of witchcraft and magic and spells, is that if your attention is focused, for example, to specific outcomes, let's say you've cast a spell to, I guess, I don't know, for wealth. Pulling this off the top of my head.
Yeah.
You're probably more likely to notice sort of surprise income, or notice a coin on the ground, or something along those lines. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
In that there is this subconscious that you can't necessarily specifically control, but you almost can control it by casting a spell, because you kind of have then implanted that in your subconscious.
It extra attentive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. In the same way that sort of anxiety, in people that have anxiety, they can often be more more responsive to anxiety triggers, like pay more attention to anxiety triggers.
Yeah.
By casting a spell, you could then be making yourself more attentive to the things that you want to be more attentive to. And I just think it's really interesting that this is not me saying, yes, science has explained away. No, this is saying that, at least from what I've gathered, these sort of practices of magic, yeah, they do have some kind of scientific basis. You can't say, oh, that's absolutely rubbish, because there is a lot that we don't understand about ourselves. And in fact, I was reading this fantastic book about sort of, and it's linked in the description, this fantastic book about the subconscious mind, essentially, and how there's so much going on that you're entirely not aware of.
Yeah.
And I just find it really interesting that you could view this as Wicca almost, or witchcraft and magic, almost tapping into that subconscious mind and finding a way to direct it. You know?
Interesting.
What I really like about the way you're describing this, Corey, is that you're just giving a different explanation for the same phenomenon. And it doesn't mean that one explanation is more valid than the other. Like the science explanation is basically like the nerdy explanation for the thing that religions have known for ages.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're also correct that some religions do have beliefs that turn out to be not true, and those are kind of like baggage that they have picked up over the centuries, like particular beliefs that our brains are potentially like more likely, like hacks in our brain that might be picked up and can carry on, like and those are not only part of religion. There are political beliefs that are sort of, they hook into your fear or that kind of thing, and they get carried along through the centuries, and we have to kind of get rid of those things. But I really like that the whole point of this is just, here is an explanation for the same phenomenon. It doesn't actually matter necessarily the cause and effect relationship of how that manifests in the external world. Like this part of the brain passes it to this part of the brain, or that kind of thing. It just matters that if you do these things, your conscious experience actually goes the way you want it to sometimes.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's cool.
No, I think this is really interesting. And honestly, I struggle to find studies on this, and I think more studies should be done on this. And what's really interesting to me about this is that I think that, as I've said already, the reason that science is sort of my lens through which I view the world is because I feel it's the most reliable. However, I feel like a lot of people that also use science as a lens through which to view the world restrict their view by only choosing to look through that lens. They almost have tunnel vision in that they would say, oh, well, Wicca, it's not science, therefore all rubbish, right? Witchcraft,
sure they would do that.
Nah, not listening to that because there's no scientific evidence for it. However, the thing is what you said there about the things that religions or different sort of spirituality, they've known about for a long, long time. And there is this sort of like, there are some instances of sort of folk psychology or like folk knowledge that when studied turns out to be true for some reason or another. And I think this is almost an example of that, in that there is this sort of thing that has been known in there's this thing that's been known in sort of witchcraft for a long, long time, in that like if you think good stuff will happen. And it doesn't need to go any farther than that, you know? There doesn't need to be well, why does this happen? Because really all that matters for us is our experiences, is the outcome. If we know that think good happen, then you don't need to know why good happened. You just need to know think good happen. I'm done. And I think here's the thing. I think that a lot of people, in specifically scientists, or people that sort of believe heavily in science, would do well to open their mind slightly to the possibilities of other things, because one, it opens up more opportunities for study, but two, also, this could really improve your life. You know, like feeling like, understanding the idea that feeling good about stuff or trying to focus on the positive can actually have a positive impact on your subjective experience. This is the thing. It may not, and this is what I'm saying here, is that it may not be that these spells actually have an impact on the world, in that they don't necessarily change our reality. In fact, I would say that plenty of sort of magic users, witches, Wiccans, may agree with that there is no sort of fundamental changing of reality, but it alters your subjective experience. You don't necessarily need you don't need a spell to alter reality to change how you feel, you know, or for it to work. You just need to change your subjective experience, because really that's all that matters. What literally actually happens is almost secondary to what you experience, because that's the lens through which you view everything.
I fully agree.
Cool, great.
Yeah.
So I just want to move on really briefly to prayers. So we've spoken about prayers already, and there are actually some studies on prayers and attentional bias. Now, at least from what I have seen in this one specific study, which is linked below, that apparently the results of this study showed that, and I'll read straight from it. These effects suggest one cognitive process, attention, that may underlie how people come to perceive answers to prayers. What that essentially says in normal people speak is is that the results of these study show that attention might play a role in people seeing their prayers answered, in that when you pray about something, your attention is then focused on the answer to that prayer, and therefore you are more likely to think that your prayer has been answered because you are paying more attention for the thing that you prayed for, if that makes sense. So if you pray for a specific positive outcome, you're subconsciously then paying more attention, looking out for that sort of positive outcome, and then when you notice it, prayer answered. Now, this is the thing. What really frustrates me about this is because this doesn't work for someone like me. This doesn't work for it winds me up because I've said I can't believe, and like looking into this stuff and seeing that, oh wow, prayer does work, but only if you have faith. God damn it.
So without
Great.
that belief element,
Yeah.
it's toast. It doesn't work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's annoying. It's because at least from look, and I've not done a full sort of review of all of the literature, but from what I've gathered, it seems that genuinely, faith and belief can cause you to have can cause your prayers to subjectively be answered.
Interesting.
Oh, and people who are part of faith-based religions are on average happier.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's been studied quite well.
Yeah.
Like,
it's
they're
annoying.
actually happier. And it's like, well, what else actually matters, man? I mean, as long as you're doing good in the world and not hurting people and you're happy, great.
And I think that's an issue that religion really, like, that's where I would put spirituality above religion, because often, like, you know, the dogma of religion really, really drags it down. And yeah, I think it's really interesting. And this is why I see a lot of, you know, I think I've definitely heard from at least Christianity that, like, when you pray for something, you're not praying for God to just do something for you. Okay, God, please make me the owner of the Denver Broncos. God's not going to be like, boom, there you go, bro.
There you go.
Happened. It's more a case of like praying for God to give you the strength to do something, or praying for God to have a less specific change. You know, you pray for someone's health. You pray for someone's, you pray for something that can be more subjectively understood. And I feel like if you pray for things that can be subjectively understood, then you are far more likely to see your prayers be answered, because it's down to your subjective experience. Yeah. Whereas if you pray for something, I feel like if you're praying for, like, I want to find $10 tomorrow,
a material thing to happen in the world.
Yeah. Exactly. Which is why I at least from what I know, I mean, I've obviously, like I said, atheist my whole life, so my understanding of, like, prayer is limited. But if you guys know, is that kind of what you guys were taught about prayer? That prayer should be less material gains and more general outcomes?
100%.
Yeah?
I don't know what I was taught. I was too young.
I mean, look, to be honest, the reason that I really enjoyed covering this is because I always love sort of, you know, showing you guys, and by you guys I mean the audience, by showing you all that science doesn't need to be a strict sort of like these are the scientific beliefs and you can't stray outside of them. Science is just a way of understanding the world, and it's the way that I choose to understand the world because, as I've said, it is the most reliable, it seems to me. But that doesn't mean that other ways of viewing the world are inherently worthless. In fact, there are many sort of overlaps between science and other ways of viewing the world. It's just that the explanations may differ. Yeah. And I don't think that really matters very much, to be honest. If someone is happy and someone is not hurting anyone else and they're getting on with their lives, then let them do that, you know? Yeah. And from what I've seen, there is some scientific basis to magic, witchcraft, some sort of spells and rituals in Wicca actually having an effect. So to say, oh, it's all rubbish and writing it off, pull your head out your ass.
It's working somehow.
Yeah, it is.
Somehow.
Yeah. Exactly.
Next week, we'll be discussing astrology.
The science of astrology.
No, we're not. Okay, that's fine. Yep, so
I think it'll be fascinating. I heard there's some scientific basis to astrology.
Well, we'll have to have a look into it then.
Please do. I mean, not we. You're the researcher.
It's believable.
So that is this week's episode. But before we go, I've got something really cool for you guys to do. It's a quickfire quiz.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun.
So the rules are as normal. I will ask one question between the two of you. You've got to answer the question. The first person to buzz in and answer correctly wins. I have to finish asking the question before you can buzz in. Those are all the rules, I think. It doesn't really matter. Let's go on. What are your buzzers? Luke, what is your buzzer?
Wicca, Wicca.
I thought we were going to stop being offensive.
No.
I'm going to rethink mine because
What
mine
is-
was going to be swish and flick, but
Come on.
my buzzer is wee.
Much better. So my question for you is, what is the Wiccan Read?
Oh.
Wicca.
Luke.
The Book of Spells. Oh wait. Oh, hang on.
Jamp?
The Book of Shadows?
Ooh, not correct.
Oh, hang on.
Luke, do you want
What
one more
they can
try?
read?
Is it? It is the book, is it?
No, shall I define the word read for you?
Yes. Go on.
Let's-
Oh, I remember you talking about this, but I've forgotten. Go on. Define the word read for me.
Okay. I will re-ask the question, okay? I'll rephrase it. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay. What is the core tenet or rule of Wicca?
Wicca.
Oh, Luke, I'm sorry. Jamp got that one.
I can't remember the exact wording, but it is do whatever you want as long as it doesn't harm anyone.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well
There you go. Good win to Jamp. Well done. Before we go, we want to thank all of our patrons because this is a patron-voted episode. That means we thank every single new patron that's joined us since the last one. So, are we ready to start reading out their names?
We've got quite a few here.
We've got a fair few.
Whew.
And if you want to be on this list next time, head over to patreon.com/Sci Guys and become a patron. Why don't you?
Yeah.
Luke, would you like to start?
Thank you to Rami Saldamando. Great name.
Ooh, thank you to Harvey Hewitt.
Thank you to Alicia Hopmeyer. Is that it?
Thank you to Acacia Henry.
Thank you to very good name. Yes, Corey.
Oh, I like that one. Thanks. Thank you to Charlotte.
Thank you to Peter Robin.
Thank you to Riley Stewart Duncan.
Thank you to Kate Hopwood.
Thank you, Sophie Woolmer.
Thank you to Gwen Osfield.
Thank you to Holly Cutts.
Thank you, Morgan Floof.
Oh, that's an amazing name. Thank you to Zach Webb.
Thank you, Claire Taylor.
Thank you, Andy Tate.
Thank you to Veggie Cannibal.
I feel like a couple of these names are perhaps based on things I've said.
No, that's not your birth name, is it, Veggie Cannibal?
Thank you to Brooke.
Thank you, Rebecca Schroeder.
Thank you to Frey Prevet.
Thank you to Loxy. And that's all of the patrons for
Oh,
this month.
wow.
Wow.
Hey.
Yay.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much. Again, if you want all of the cool perks you get over at Patreon, like bonus episodes, bonus clips, votes, and submissions, and loads of cool stuff, head over to patreon.com/Sci Guys and you can sign up. But before we go, we would like to give a very special thank you to Ashley Muller, our executive producer.
Yeah,
our executive
that is the
producer.
title. Yeah, we're changing it a bit.
Executive producer.
Our executive producer.
Ashley Muller.
And Jawahar A. And also, thank you for watching. You can find the full references for this episode in the description. Subscribe for new episodes every Sunday, and why not leave us a nice wee comment? You can support the pod at patreon.com/Sci Guys, or you can find and contact us at Sci Guys Pod on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, or Sci Guys Pod on TikTok too. I am not Corey everywhere.
I'm jumping everywhere.
Hi, I'm Luke Upward everywhere.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.